My name is Hernán Azorey, and with Antonio Juan Rubio Montero and our colleagues from CIEMAT in Spain and Centro Atómico Bariloche in Argentina, we are glad to be here on behalf of the LAGO collaboration to present our last work entitled A Novel Cloud-Based Framework for Standardizing Simulations in the Latin American Giant Observatory, LAGO. This talk has three different parts. In the first section, I will present the physical motivations and the effects that we have to take into account in order to get a deeper understanding of the background radiation produced during the interaction of cosmic rays with the atmosphere. Then, in the second part, Antonio Juan will present the computational challenges that we have to face and the tools that we have to develop to take fully advantage of the different cloud available resources, and to standardize our simulation framework by adopting the FAIR principles. Finally, in the third part, I will describe some of the results we obtained in using this framework. Astroparticles, formerly known as cosmic rays, were discovered at the beginning of the last century by Victor Hess by measuring the rate of ion productions inside an electrometer at different altitudes during several balloon flights. His definition is still the best available definition for this phenomenon. He said, the result of my observations are best explained by the assumption that the radiation of very great penetrating power enters our atmosphere from above. Today we know those astroparticles are mainly protons and atomic nuclei, impinging the Earth's atmosphere from outside of the solar system. The astroparticle spectra can be easily described as a power law with a general spectral index of about -3, while the exact value will depend on the particle energy and the particle type, as can be clearly seen in the shown spectra from protons to ions, that were separated for better visualization. This spectral index means that the flux is diminished by a factor of 1000 when the energy is increased by an order of magnitude. As astroparticles are mainly charged particles, they are deflected by the presence of magnetic fields at different scales. In the low energy range, below tens of GeV, the heliospheric and the geomagnetic effects can be clearly seen. We call these particles that can finally reach the Earth's atmosphere as primaries. Once these primaries reach the atmosphere, they interact with the nuclei of the gases composing the air, producing cascades of secondary particles that can interact with other nuclei present in the air, or can decay, producing other secondary particles, or even to be absorbed in the atmosphere. Secondary particles are mainly photons and electrons, with about 10% of muons and less than 5% of hadrons. At the maximum development point, one of these cascades could have up to 10 to the 12 secondary particles. To simulate this phenomena, also called extensive air showers, we need to track the trajectory of all these large number of relativistic particles, while all the possible interactions and decay modes are taken into account during the development of the cascade. Due to these interaction processes produce large number of particles, secondaries are the main source of natural radiation. As the cascades evolve in the atmosphere, the flux of secondaries will strongly depend on the altitude above sea level. From about 700 particles per square meter per second, this flux can be easily increased by 2 orders of magnitude at commercial flight altitudes. Once the secondaries reach the observation level, new processes have to be taken into account depending on the final application. For the design of new detectors and the development of better radiation shields, or for the propagation of secondaries through hundreds of meters of rock, for mining, prospecting, or volcanic risk assessments, or even for the calculation of radiation dose that the crew is exposed during flight. These calculations require the integration of different Monte Carlo tools, such as Corsica or Chamfort. For doing this, we developed ARTI, a computational framework designed to implement the calculation of the expected flux of secondary particles and the corresponding signals or doses at any place in the world. With ARTI, we are able to calculate the expected flux of primaries at the top of the atmosphere by integrating the all-particle measure flux from proton to ions and including other primaries such as photons or electrons. The energy range is selected according to the application. The integrated flux can easily reach hundreds of millions of primaries per day per square meter. RT allows us to compute the effects introduced on the primary flux by the secular variation of the geomagnetic field and those variations produced by the solar activity that also produce time variations in the secondary flux. As we can see in the last column, in the flux of muons and neutrons. As the cascade evolves in the atmosphere, with RT we are able to obtain and apply the instantaneous atmospheric profiles extracted from GDAS in an almost real-time basis. Significant differences have been observed when compared with the global atmospheric profiles used in the past. All these calculations have been verified by comparison with different sources of data acquired by our detection network across Latin America. As you can imagine, to account for all these effects in a precise and statistically significant manner require the implementation of these tools at high-performance computing or cloud-based environments, as will be described by Antonio Juan in the next section.
Standardizing simulations. LAGO is a non-centralized alliance of church institutions from 11 countries. It's very difficult to coordinate the different groups, not only the ones working on simulations. For example, the data are not preserved, some developments are private, or the computational resources are limited, etc. Several initiatives were proposed to face these problems, giving a different degree of success, but it is not enough. The main problem of LAGO is that it doesn't count on mechanisms for data curation, which hampers the reproducibility of findings. We need another approach, which could be the adoption of the open science paradigm. However, it isn't that easy. That is the typical open science taxonomy, and it's plenty of recommendations. It's clear that open science is the combination of mechanisms that allow others collaborating and contributing. These mechanisms enable the reproducibility, the sustainability, and the future and external profit of the work done. The question is, how will we apply these recommendations? And every expert has his own vision. Our approach is apply the FAIR principles to every result, which includes that data, but also any other material obtained. So, but what's actually fair? While open science deals with general concepts, to achieve fair, specific actions should be accomplished. Usually, there are standardized templates for data management plans, which must be checked item by item to get fair data. We could fail in standardizations to other research results than data, such as computing platforms, CEICD, or how-tos, and grouping them in standard and dynamic DMPs. In this slide, we summarize the most important items, but however, this work is focused on the curation and provenance of data, metadata, and the cloud platforms used in this simulation. With respect to cloud platform usage, this work makes use of the resources offered by the EUC Synergy project. This initiative was born to profit from the effort of several projects in Europe, guaranteeing long-term sustainability. It's aligned with the open science paradigm and provides the expertise to choose the adequate tools for standardizing LAGO simulations. Going back with the simulation process, there are three main types of data and three main steps following what software generates them. We can encapsulate each software as well as the mechanisms to manage the data and create the metadata in three different Docker images. One data sim is 0, ACE1, or ACE2, depending on the type of data generated, primaries, secondaries, and those are signals. The pipeline for the register takes this figure. There are many options, inputs, and parameters, as well as every Docker generates about 200 of files. To correctly standardize the computation, we must carefully choose metadata schemas and data structures that allow linking data and provenance. The first one is the language syntax. We choose JSON-LD, the current standard for linking data, more flexible, easy, and powerful than IRDF. The vocabulary will be DCAT AP2, a profile of DCAT2. It should be mandatory for European repositories. We have reprofiled DCAT to incorporate the class and properties needed for LAGO computation. The data is structured in a way compatible with DCAT. The repository is a super catalog, and every simulation is a simple catalog that has its own handle by ID. Finally, every file has structured data, and it can be considered a dataset in DCAT vocabulary. It has in sense used a PID for every dataset because they will not be referenced individually. Although references are needed for provenance, and we use relative IDs for that. To store jointly the data and metadata, allowing an unified access, we need cloud-based file system, but not anyone. We require a specific platform for data science that allow publishing the data. Among the offered by AOC Synergy, Wine Data is the most suitable for LAGO collaboration because it's easy to extend the storage with providers on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean. Moreover, EOC supports a hit instance for our benefit. OneData supports several HPC protocols available on local area networks. However, for LAGO computations, we are only interested in the protocols that allow access to remote storage providers. This is so because we require that any researcher can collaborate, although he has limited bandwidth. For this reason, the calculation is scratched and the copies pilinate. On the other hand, we require compatibility with the maximum number of platforms. Every collaborator counts on different resources. For this reason, the management of data and metadata with these protocols are encapsulated in a Docker image that is called OneData Sim. Of course, scientists can use the previous protocols to explore the data, but it's also available a web portal for that. Obviously, only the members of LAGO can log in, and they should be authenticated through the LAGO identity provider. We choose EU Teams for this service because it has pan-European support. As you can see, every simulation has its metadata as well as every file. When a simulation is completed, it can be published. When data will call for a handle by ID and then will expose the metadata to the world using OAI-PMH protocol. Harvesters such as OpenAir, Mendeley, or B2Fine obtain this metadata and will sort them. Anybody can use the search engines of this harvester to find data of interest with the needed links to one data. EOST Synergy also offers a service as a cloud provisioner. The infrastructure manager is able to configure virtual clusters in several private and public clouds. As you can see, under the common authentication through EU Teams, you can set the type of resources to launch on the cloud. In the case, we set an Slam batch queue in the CMA provider, which belongs to the European cloud. Adding all together, this is the common way to perform standardized simulations on EOC resources. Scientists authenticate and then apply for a virtual cluster at the infrastructure manager portal. At some minutes, the cluster is configured and they can access via SSH. The researcher can then submit to the batch queue the simulations encapsulated in the one-data images, pulled from the LAGO Docker Hub account.
So we took advantage of all these new tools for different applications, as we will describe in the next section. As we mentioned, the Latin American Highland Observatory is an extended observatory observatory at continental scale. Our detection network consists of single or small arrays of water Cherenkov detectors spanning across Latin America, from the high altitude mountains of the Andes Range in Mexico to the cold plateaus of the Antarctic Peninsula. With this synchronized detection network, the time evolution of the flux of signals produced by secondary particles impinging each water Cherenkov detector are registered, transferred, and stored in a central repository for further analysis. The detection of the high-energy component of astrophysical transients, such as the sudden occurrence of a gamma ray burst or space weather-related phenomena, are some of the scientific objectives for that. In this case, RT and OneDataSim have been used to calculate the spec background at new sites of our detection network for different applications. At low-altitude sites, such as La Serena in Chile at sea level, we calculate the spec background flux as the reference flux for the study of variations related with space weather phenomena. At high-altitude sites, such as our new sites at Imata in Peru or San Antonio de los Cobres in Argentina, we characterize the background for the detection of the sudden increases in the flux due to the arrival to Earth of the high-energy component of gamma ray bursts. Another related application is to determine the weather-modulated flux of mid, high, and low-energy neutrons for the design of enhanced shielding and new high-performance computing facilities. Another interesting application of our technology is to calculate the spec flux of high-energy particles for biography applications. Biography is a new technique that takes advantage of atmospheric muons to measure the internal density distribution of large objects in the same way as a radiography maps the internal density of tissues by using X-rays. In this case, by using muon detectors, we study the density distribution of active volcanoes for volcanic risk assessment or in mines for prospective mining applications. In these cases, using one data sim, we are able to calculate the most accurate available flux of the high energy secondaries at different sites around the world, such as a gold mine at 2,600 meters above sea level, or the SPECT flux at the top of the mountain where the Andes Underground Laboratory will be located. The total number of eject particles correspond to the SPECT flux during 1 year per square meter. For these applications, once the secondary flux at ground level is obtained, it has to be propagated through hundreds to thousands meters of different types of rocks, having different composition and densities. For doing this, we use the One Data Sim S2 Docker containing Mega, our new Chamfor integration framework. With Mega, we are able to simulate the particle absorption and the Coulomb scattering of the muons while they traverse through different types of rocks, and then the signals expect at any type of particle detector. As an example, here we can observe how the high energy secondary flux is injected and propagated through 500 meters of standard rock. The muon flux is scattered across the underground surface, where one of our muon detectors is also simulated. The SPECT signals for the detection of a muon is seen as a pulse in the digital twin of our detector built in Chamfor. The main conclusion of this work is the deployment of One Data Sim, a functional, fully integrated, FAIR compliant, public available, and cloud-based service based on the ARTI and the MEGA frameworks. All the produced data that up to here correspond to the simulation of more than 10 to the 13 cascades in 1 million CPU hours will be also publicly available after a short embargo period. This new development allows us to calculate the signals or the radiation dose expected above, at, and even below the Earth's surface at any place in the world and under time-evolving atmospheric and geomagnetic conditions. If you have any further question or request, please don't hesitate to contact us. Thank you very much for your attention and enjoy this wonderful conference.